Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. This is the Bold Empathy Project podcast, and I'm Brian Walden Pope, creator of the Bold Empathy Framework. Today I'm going to share a half-truth with you that we've all been taught in some form or another, and which most of us have chosen to believe and follow. Unfortunately, it severely limits our success and the success of those around us. If you'll invest just a few minutes to discover the other half of this truth, you'll be armed to make a significant breakthrough in your success today. And when I say today, I mean before you go to bed. We've all been taught, and most of us have accepted, a half-truth that limits our own success and the success of those with whom we interact. This half-truth tells us that we should first strive to understand others, then help them understand us. Now, this sounds right, doesn't it? So where's the error? Well, the first half is more or less correct, although the word first connotes that we're going to spill our thoughts after the person speaking is done. It's the second part where the disconnect happens and where conflicts enter in. People don't need to understand us. They need to understand themselves, their situations, their values, their experiences, their vision, and what they can do to transform their vision into reality. That's what we're going to take a look at here today. As we listen to others, one of the big mistakes we make is that we're busy formulating our response while that person is talking. That keeps us from being fully present. It keeps us from having truly meaningful conversations. One of the things we try to get over this is something that you've probably heard called reflective listening. There's other terms used as well for that. The problem with this is it gets monotonous and it's largely ineffective. People say what they have to say. We respond and say, well, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is, and we repeat it back to them in our words. You can see how this gets monotonous. It doesn't take too long for people to say, is it me who's speaking like a 5-year-old, or are you just dense? It really does not work that well. So the solution to this is to have conversations that are within that person's paradigm in their world in such a way that we're having a real conversation, but it's all about things they understand. All shortcomings fit into one or both of two categories. And I mentioned previously a little bit about conflict and disconnections. That's where these problems definitely come up. We run into some kind of conflict where there's a disagreement of some type, or we fail to connect, either as people or we fail to help people connect ideas together or needs and resources or whatever the case may be. The biggest disconnect of all happens when we attempt to pull other people into our worlds. We don't stay in their world, in their paradigm to have a conversation. So the principle that I want to replace this other one with that I talked about at the beginning, to strive first to understand people and then have them understand us, or then to give advice, or then to whatever, is to simply say this: step into other people's worlds and stay there. Now, when I say this, I want to point out that this doesn't mean you're changing your values, your beliefs, any of that type of thing. It doesn't mean you need to even agree with the person. We're simply going to have conversations in their world, in their paradigm. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like here. If we find ourselves saying, I know what you're saying, and then we go on to spew our advice, or we say, that happened to me too, or anything else, we have tried then to pull that person into our world. When we stay more in a mode of saying things like, tell me more about that, that's where we're staying in their worlds. Now, there are some very specific ways to do this, and as you listen to this podcast and as you get into the training that we have, which we have the introductory training for free, I'm going to tell you about that in a minute here, you're going to discover how to have very specific. It's not just tell me more about that and then listening to them. It's actually guiding the conversation so that it comes to the right outcome for the other person, for the person that we are talking to. So the first thing we need to do is notice how often we attempt to make our point known or understood instead of genuinely working to understand others. When we start paying attention to this, it's crazy how fast we start to realize, wow, I am very busy spewing advice and talking about myself and other things instead of staying in other people's worlds. And this is a great first realization for us to have. The key here then is, once you feel you understand, stay in other people's worlds by helping them discover their answers. After all, the answers for them are inside of them. That's something I believe very fully. We become facilitators in helping people find those things for themselves, whether we're a salesperson looking to close a sale, a business owner or manager working with a team member, a parent with a child, a teacher with a student, any of those situations, we become facilitators, and that's what bold empathy is all about. So that first thing that I want you to do is simply be aware of how often you attempt to pull other people into your world instead of staying in theirs. Now, to get more insight on this topic right now, if you'd like, you can watch our introductory training at boldempathy.com. And as a thank you for listening to this podcast, you can get the training for free by simply using the code PODCAST. If you like what you've heard today, please rate and review this podcast in your app store. This makes it easier for others to find this show. I sincerely appreciate your help in bringing the message of bold empathy to the world. Thank you. And finally, here's a point to ponder. Counterproductive disconnections happen when we attempt to pull people out of their worlds into ours. When we keep our conversations and focus in other people's worlds, we accelerate our connections with them, and we get a front row seat to watching them connect the dots that transform their visions into exciting reality.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, discover more at boldempathy.com. And remember to follow us on your favorite social media platforms.